There is a warm, amber glow that remains long after the fire of the struggle has gone out. We tell the stories of hope and warmth that survive even the coldest winters of life. Hit subscribe today and keep the glow of great storytelling alive in your heart.
The morning of my daughter's graduation dinner, I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot for 4 extra minutes. I did not go inside. I just sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the gold-lettered sign above the entrance, breathing slowly. I had waited 4 years for this night. 4 years of ramen dinners, secondhand textbooks, and one very long conversation with my landlord about a 3-week late rent check. 4 years of watching my daughter study at the kitchen table past midnight, while I pretended to be asleep on the couch so she would not feel guilty about the light. And tonight was supposed to be hers. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself everything would be fine. I was wrong. Let me back up. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. I manage a small alterations and tailoring shop that I built from a spare bedroom and a used industrial sewing machine 6 years ago. I am a single mother. My daughter, Lily, just graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in environmental science and a 3.8 gigapascals. She did it on a combination of scholarships, work study, and what I can only describe as sheer bone-deep stubbornness, a quality she inherited from me, which I consider the greatest compliment I have ever received. Lily's father and I divorced when she was 7. He is remarried now. His wife, my sister-in-law, I suppose, though that word still sits funny in my mouth, is a woman named Dara. Dara is 34. Dara has never held a job for longer than 8 months. Dara considers herself an influencer, which in practice means she takes photographs of food she does not finish and posts them to an account with 11,000 followers, most of whom I strongly suspect are not real people. Dara is also the reason I spent 4 extra minutes in that parking lot trying to remember how to breathe. Here is what you need to understand about Dara before I tell you what happened. When Lily was a freshman, Dara borrowed $800 from me. She called it borrowing. She said she needed it for a car repair. She said she would pay me back within the month. That was 3.5 years ago. When I brought it up the following Christmas, my ex-husband, I will call him Marcus, told me to let it go, because Dara was going through something. I let it go. Or rather, I stopped bringing it up, which is not the same thing at all, though I have noticed that people who benefit from your silence tend to treat those two things as identical. A year after that, Dara asked Lily directly for money. $200, she said, for a content opportunity she needed to front. Lily was 19, working 15 hours a week at a campus coffee shop, and she gave it to her stepmother because she did not know how to say no to an adult who asked with enough confidence. When Lily told me, I felt something cold and specific settle into my chest. I did not call Dara. I did not call Marcus. I opened a notes app on my phone and I wrote it down. The date, the amount, the circumstances. I do not know exactly why I did that. I think some part of me already understood that I was going to need receipts. I booked the restaurant 3 months in advance. It is called Oleander. It is the kind of place where the lighting is amber and low, where the menu changes seasonally, where the bread arrives in a cloth-lined basket with 3 kinds of butter. It is not the most expensive restaurant in the city, but it is the nicest one I have ever been able to afford, and I had been saving specifically for this dinner since January. I reserved a table for 6. Me, Lily, my mother, my best friend Denise, Lily's roommate Priya, and her academic advisor Dr. Harmon, who had mentored her through her senior thesis and had become genuinely important to Lily over the past 2 years. I spent 45 minutes choosing the table. I called the restaurant twice to confirm. I arranged for a small custom cake with Lily's name on it to be brought out at the end of the evening, and I paid a deposit to hold the reservation. I want you to understand how much I had planned this. I want you to understand that nothing about this night was casual or accidental. Every seat at that table was chosen with intention. Marcus called me 10 days before the dinner. He said he and Dara wanted to come. I told him I was happy to have him there and that I could add a 7th seat. He said, and I remember this precisely because I wrote it down immediately after we hung up, Dara might bring a couple of her friends too. They've been really supportive of her page lately, and she thought it would be a nice outing. I felt the cold thing in my chest again. I told him this was Lily's graduation dinner, not a content outing, and that I had arranged specific seating for people who were meaningful to Lily's academic journey. He said, "You're being rigid." I said I would add a seat for him and one for Dara, and that was the table. He said fine. He said it the way people say fine when they mean the opposite of fine. I should have known. I want to be honest with you about that. Looking back at that phone call, I can see every signal clearly. But I had been giving people the benefit of the doubt for so long that it had become a reflex, the way you keep reaching for a light switch in a room where the bulb burned out months ago. The night of the dinner, I arrived 30 minutes early. I spoke with our server, a young man named Theo, and I explained the setup for the evening. I told him it was a graduation celebration. I told him who the guest of honor was. I also told him, and I said this carefully and clearly, that the table was reserved for 8 people now, that I would be paying for the 6 seats I had originally planned, and that if any additional guests arrived beyond those 8, their orders should be put on a completely separate check from the start. Theo nodded. He did not ask why. I appreciated that more than he knows. Lily arrived with Priya at 7 on the dot. She was wearing a green dress I had never seen before, and her graduation stole, and when she walked through the door of Oleander, she looked around at the amber lighting and the white tablecloths and the small vase of flowers I had asked the restaurant to place at her seat, and she put her hand over her mouth. My mother arrived 2 minutes later and immediately started crying, which made Lily start crying, which made me start crying while trying very hard to look like I was not. Denise arrived and handed Lily a card containing a check and a handwritten note that made Lily laugh out loud and then cry again. Dr. Harmon arrived in a blazer and brought a book she had signed the inside cover of. Marcus arrived at 7:15 without calling ahead to say he was running late. Dara arrived at 7:22 with 4 people. I counted them as they came through the door. Dara first, in a silky top that caught the light, phone already out, already filming the entryway. Then a woman I had never seen before, wearing a bandana as a top. Then 2 men, also strangers, one of whom was carrying a camera with a ring light attached to it. Then another woman, younger, who walked in looking at her phone and did not look up until she nearly walked into the host stand. 4 extra people at my daughter's graduation dinner. I felt my jaw tighten. I felt my hands, which were resting in my lap, close slowly into fists beneath the tablecloth. I looked at Lily. Lily was looking at the door. The expression on her face was the one she has had since she was small, when something disappoints her, and she is deciding whether to show it a very brief, very controlled stillness, like a lake just before a wind picks up. She looked at me. I looked back at her. I smiled. Not a big smile. A small, steady one that I hoped said, I see it. I have it. It is handled. Marcus stood up and went to greet them. I heard him say something about a big table and there being plenty of room. I heard Dara say, loudly enough for the nearby tables to glance over, oh my gosh, this place is gorgeous. We have to get content here. I watched one of the men with the camera start adjusting his ring light. The host came to me quietly and said they could push a small table alongside ours to accommodate the additional guests. I told him, also quietly, that the additional guests were not part of my reservation, that their orders should be tracked on a completely separate check, as I had discussed with Theo earlier, and that I wanted to make sure that was flagged before anyone ordered anything. He said, of course. He said it had already been noted. Dara and her group settled at the extended table. It was adjacent to ours, but distinct, which I think Dara did not fully register at first because she was busy positioning a candle for a photograph. She ordered a bottle of sparkling wine before anyone had even opened a menu. Not a glass, a bottle. The specific bottle she requested was one I recognized from the menu as being $280. She said it was to kick off the celebration. Marcus, to his credit, looked slightly uncomfortable. He did not say anything, but he looked it. Then she ordered the tasting menu. At Oleander, the tasting menu is a 7-course experience that runs $215 per person. She ordered it for herself and gestured vaguely at her 4 friends, as if to suggest they would be doing the same. She also asked whether the kitchen could do a charcuterie arrangement for the table as an additional starter, and whether they had any truffle options as a supplement to course 3. I watched Theo write it all down with a face that revealed absolutely nothing, and I thought, I like this young man. I like him very much. My daughter's dinner was beautiful. I want to make sure I say that clearly, because the other part of the evening takes up a lot of space, and I do not want it to crowd out what actually mattered. Lily talked about her thesis, about the wetland restoration project she had spent 8 months on. It's about the professor who had told her in her sophomore year that her ideas were too ambitious and how she had kept that comment taped to her desk for 2 years, not as a wound but as a fuel source. Dr. Harmon told a story about reading Lily's thesis draft at midnight and sending her an email that was essentially just a series of exclamation points. My mother told the story of Lily at age 4 declaring that she was going to be a water scientist after watching a nature documentary. And Lily hid her face in her hands and said, Grandma, please, but she was smiling. Denise made everyone at our end of the table laugh so hard that the couple at the next table looked over, and I caught them smiling too. Priya gave a toast that was short and specific, and so genuinely loving that the whole table went quiet afterward for a moment in that way that only happens when something true has been said out loud. There were moments, I will be honest, where I was aware of the other table, of Dara's voice carrying, of the camera being repositioned. of one of her friends saying, "Wait, do that again," to another friend who had just taken a bite of something. Of Marcus eating quietly with the look of a man who had made several decisions he was not ready to examine. But I kept my attention on my daughter. I kept it there deliberately. I had worked too hard for this evening to let it be hijacked by someone else's need for an audience. The trouble started properly around the main course. Dara leaned across the gap between the tables and touched my arm. I looked at her. She said, "Claire, do you mind if we do a little toast to Lily? For content? It would be really sweet she could be in the background." I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her. I said, "This is a private family dinner. I'd prefer we keep it that way." She pulled her hand back. She smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes and said, "Of course, totally understand." She turned to her friends and said something in a low voice, and two of them laughed. Marcus came around to my side of the table about 10 minutes later. He crouched down beside my chair. He said quietly, "Hey, I know this isn't ideal, but Dara's been having a rough couple of months, and this is kind of a big deal for her, the content stuff. Could you maybe just—" I turned and looked at him. I said, also quietly, "Marcus, this dinner is for Lily. I planned it for 6 months. If Dara wanted to celebrate Lily, she could have done that without a camera crew and a $280 bottle of wine." He opened his mouth. I said, "I love that you came tonight. I mean that. But I am not discussing Dara's content strategy at our daughter's graduation dinner." He closed his mouth. He went back to his seat. At the end of the evening, the cake came out. The lights went a shade lower, which the restaurant did beautifully, and a few of the servers gathered, and Theo led a quiet, genuinely warm round of happy graduation as the cake was set in front of Lily. She blew out the single candle I had requested one, for elegance, and she looked across the table at me and mouthed something. I think it was thank you. I think it might have been more than that. I am her mother. I will not try to translate it. Then Theo set down 2 checks. He placed mine in front of me smoothly and without ceremony. It covered the 8 seats I had arranged. He walked to the extended portion of the table and placed the second check in front of the nearest person to him, which happened to be one of Dara's friends. There was a moment of confusion, the kind where people look at a piece of paper and then look up as if the paper might have made a mistake. Dara leaned over and looked at the check. She looked up at Theo. She said, "Wait, is this why are there 2 checks?" Theo said, calmly and pleasantly, "The reservation this evening was for 8 guests. The additional seating was arranged separately, so those orders are on a separate check." Dara looked at the check again. I could see, from where I was sitting, that she was doing math. I could see the moment the math finished. She looked at me. I met her eyes. I did not look away, and I did not smile, and I did not apologize. I simply looked back at her the way you look at someone when you have done nothing wrong and you both know it. She said, "Claire, you can't be serious." I said, "I'm very serious." She said, "This is a family dinner." I said, "It is, which is why I paid for the family." Marcus said, "Dara, let's just." She said, "Marcus, she's making us pay for our own food at our daughter's graduation." I said, "My daughter's graduation, and you're welcome to have celebrated it differently. I had nothing to do with what you ordered tonight." She put her card down. The reader came back. The card was declined. She put down a second card. It was also declined. She opened her bag and found a third card and put it down with less confidence than the first 2. That one was also declined. I watched this happen. I did not say anything. I did not make a face. I looked down at my own receipt and signed it and added a tip that I was genuinely proud of given what Theo had handled that evening. Marcus paid for Dara's portion. He used his own card. It went through on the first try. He did not look at me while he did it, and I did not look at him while he did it. And I think we both understood that a conversation was going to need to happen at some point that neither of us was ready to have yet. In the parking lot afterward, Lily and I walked to our cars together. She slipped her arm through mine. She said, "Mom, the thing with the checks." I said, "Yes?" She said, "When did you do that?" I said, "When I arrived." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You planned that before you even knew for sure she was going to pull something." I said, "I prepared. There's a difference." She laughed. It was a short, real laugh, the kind that comes out when something is both funny and true at the same time. She leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment as we walked. She smelled like the restaurant, and her shampoo and 4 years of hard work finally finished. She said, "Thank you for tonight, Mom, for all of it." I said, "Every bit of it was for you." She squeezed my arm. We stood at her car for a moment in the cold, and she looked up at me and she looked, very briefly, like she was 7 again, and also exactly like herself right now. And I thought about all the ramen dinners and the midnight studying and the light I used to leave on and the $800 I never got back and the note in my phone with the dates and the amounts. I thought it was worth it, every single piece of it. Here's what I want to say to you before I go, because I know some of you watching this have been sitting in your own parking lots. Some of you have been swallowing things you should not have to swallow and telling yourself it is easier or more mature or more generous to let it go. Maybe it is sometimes. But there is a version of letting it go that is just slow surrender, and it teaches the people around you exactly what you will accept. The kindest thing I did that evening was not the cake or the flowers or the 6 months of saving. The kindest thing I did was decide, quietly and in advance, that this night belonged to my daughter, and I did not let anyone change that. You do not owe anyone your silence just because they share your last name. You do not owe anyone a free dinner just because they call it family. And you do not have to make a scene to hold a boundary. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet word to your server before the night begins. Have you ever had to protect something you worked hard for from someone who assumed they were entitled to it? Have you ever had to hold a line, not with anger, but just with complete quiet certainty? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your story. And if you found this helpful, or if some part of it felt like something you needed to hear today, please subscribe to Maiden's Return. There are more stories here. More evenings that almost got taken, and the moments they did not. I will see you in the next one.